I say to people, had I known what it would have entailed when I started, I probably wouldn't have done it. And not because I didn't want to do it or I don't love it, I don't think it's brilliant, but just because I would have been overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work that is involved. And not only the sheer amount of work involved, but God, there were just so many unknowns. And I launched myself into it with the bit of hubris and confidence, but of I'll figure it out and it's okay, let me just take one step at a time.
Hubris, confidence and ignorance. Perfect.
Mix. The golden trifecta for any entrepreneur. I do think it is actually to a certain extent. But as it turned out, there were a lot of things I didn't know. And along the way, I did start to be like, oh God, what have I done? But it was almost too late by then.
Welcome to the Make Your Mark series, where we profile interesting women doing wonderful, pioneering things in their careers and in their lines of work. So in the past, we've spoken to women in athletics, in finance, in business, entrepreneurs, and today we're speaking to Layla Maghribi. Layla has started a podcast called Third Culture Therapy and has had a very interesting journey getting there. So thank you so much, Layla, for joining today.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
Okay, so Layla, you were one of the few journalists whom I know who had the luck of holding down a full-time journalistic job. I think a lot of journalists are in the perennial place of freelancing and trying to find, where the next paycheck's coming from, and it's kind of part and parcel of that career path. But you decided to give it all away and start something different and something new. First of all, are you insane? And second of all, why?
Yes, I think the answer to the first question is probably a little bit yes. I do think you have to have a little bit of insanity to launch yourself into the unknown, which is what anything entrepreneurial is. I lived several years in the Middle East working as a journalist there between Lebanon, the UAE and Syria. I did a lot of feature programs. I traveled all across the Arabic-speaking world, doing shows, and I was a producer and a writer. And then when I moved back to London, I was a correspondent for an international Middle East paper in English, and I used to cover stories predominantly on Arabic-speaking culture in the UK and across Europe, but also migration, refugees, stories like that. All really I love the stories, really, really meant a lot to me. I'm very connected to my Middle Eastern culture, my Arab background, and so it was important to me, and I really valued the privilege of being able to shed light on that culture and that society. Yeah. Where I felt there was some limitation is that I, as a writer, but also someone who's very interested in mental health, of course I did write some articles on it, but I really wanted to expand that conversation and to go more deeply into it. And that came as a result of my own personal experiences or struggles with mental health at a certain point in my life. And having been through therapy and just a journey of self-reflection and self-development and really asking myself some very deep, difficult questions, and also going through a process of healing and recovery to a certain extent, which is always a work in progress. But I came to realize how much of some of the issues I was facing were related to questions around identity, questions around history, questions around migration, the the tension between holding dual cultures within me. And I felt like having spoken more and more to people, I realized it wasn't just me. There were so many like me who were struggling with that and not necessarily feeling that the current discourse around mental health, great as it is, but it was still limited, and it was still very much from a sort of Eurocentric, Western-centric lens. And I felt that was a real shame because, there are many third culture types and many people who have dual identities or multiple identities, and they don't, their issues are quite specific and unique, let's say, and diverse.
Yeah.
And I really felt for I felt for those people in the same way I felt for myself. Like I wanted, they say you do things because you kind of wish
access to them.
You would have liked access to that thing, and then you wait, and then you're like, oh, maybe I'm supposed to create that thing.
Yeah. So the gap that you identified was podcasts that explore mental health and identity for people who were raised in multicultural households.
Yeah, it's a podcast that sits at the intersection of culture and mental health.
Yeah.
The way different social identities impact your emotional and mental well-being, both positively and negatively. And it's an exploration of mental and emotional well-being, but through the prism of, a variety of factors that I don't think are discussed personally enough when it comes to the sort of Western dialogue around mental health, but looking at history, politics, sexuality. And it is looking at people who consider themselves either third culture or, dual nationals or have some, or even, if they've spent a long time living abroad, what have they learned from these places? What have they taken on board?
Yeah.
Funnily enough, what precipitated it was actually I had a serious back problem. Yeah, I ruptured a disc in my back. I don't know how exactly. I think it was one of those cumulative things people don't always know. But as a result of it, I had I was like 2 months off work, 6 months in agony pain. And honestly, I say to people, there's nothing like acute pain to bring some things into sharp focus for you, what you can handle and what you can't handle. When that happened and I had to stop, I really reflected on my life and my lifestyle, my choices. And I thought, oh gosh, you're really stressed, Layla. Like you're actually really stressed in this job because I care a lot, but I wasn't feeling entirely fulfilled.
Yeah.
And I'm, a big believer in the mind, body, soul connection. I think your body tells you a lot of things. And if you take the time to listen, you can get some really important messages. And I think that time where I had to basically just recuperate and recover made me think really deeply, what do you want your life to be going forward? How are you going to build a life that isn't going to cause you pain, that is going to be sustainable?
And fulfilling.
Yeah.
I found some of your articles, especially on Afghan refugees in the UK and in Calais and others, really, really powerful, very moving. But I can imagine that was incredibly stressful. And if you're doing something that's high intensity, emotionally, high emotional intensity, incredibly straining, and you're not looking after your body or you're not listening to whether you're really feeling fulfilled by it, I imagine then there's like a coalescence of all the bad things in one go. You're stressed, your body's not in a good place, you're not listening to yourself, you're not fulfilled.
You hit the nail on the head. Those stories, much as they were important and I loved them, they really did take it out of me because I do really care. And I was really entering these very vulnerable spaces and stories.
Yeah.
And then, as per the nature of journalism,
you leave?
I leave. And I leave those people and those stories behind, but I didn't really, not emotionally.
No.
I wasn't really leaving it behind. I was just taking it on to the next one. And the grind of journalism, the having to constantly churn stuff out, doesn't give you the time to process and to recover. And most of the time, in all honesty, by the end, I was like, these stories are great and I know that I'm doing well, but I was feeling increasingly bad because I was like, I'm leaving these people behind. And I, in a way, I actually would rather help now than write about it. And I felt like as I was entering that sort of frame of mind, that meant I needed to make a shift.
Yeah.
When I decided to leave, I knew that I wanted, lifestyle-wise, I was writing a book and going freelance.
Yeah.
But I also had to be a bit honest with the nature of myself, which is having been over a decade of working as a journalist, traveling around the world, having these constant deliverables, the nature of like, go, go, go. Had I gone from that to nothing, And a book, I'm not saying it's nothing, but it's a long-term project.
It's also a different tempo.
It's completely different tempo, right? And if I had gone from that to
Not that I know, I've never written a book. I say this so confidently, but
you know plenty of writers,
exactly.
and you know exactly.
It's an entirely different tempo.
And it's like if I had gone from that straight to that, I was worried that I was going to struggle myself emotionally, mentally, and I was afraid I would feel a bit like I had failed or that I wasn't doing anything, falling into the whole productivity trap. What am I doing? What am I achieving? So, but that's not the reason why I launched Third Culture Therapy. I launched it because I genuinely felt there's a need, there's a gap, and I think I can do this. I think I can fill that.
Has it gone as you expected?
Ooh, definitely not. No, and I think that's definitely for the best. Because I say to people, had I known what it would have entailed when I started, I probably wouldn't have done it. And not because I didn't want to do it or I don't love it, I don't think it's brilliant, but just because I would have been overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work that is involved. And not only the sheer amount of work involved, but God, there were just so many unknowns. And I launched myself into it with the bit of hubris and confidence, but of I'll figure it out and it's okay. Let me just take one step at a time.
Hubris, confidence, and ignorance. Perfect.
Perfect. The golden trifecta for any entrepreneur. I do think it is actually to a certain extent. But as it turned out, there were a lot of things I didn't know. And along the way, I did start to be like, oh God, what have I done? But it was almost too late by then. And I think that's kind of the trick to a certain extent. Fool yourself just enough to just keep going. And then when the problems arise, you have to deal with them, but you've already gone forward. I think had I done what
You're in too deep.
You're in too deep. Go back. You know? Whereas before, I think traditionally we're trained, but also I had thought you have to really know what you're doing. You have to have this full plan, have mapped it out, figured out all of the pitfalls and mitigated against it, and then do it.
Yeah.
This time I actually approached this very differently.
I think in your case, you just jumped in and you launched the process and started. Mm-hmm. What was the low and maybe also what was the best piece of advice someone gave you, whichever way you feel like tackling those questions?
Low-wise was actually a lot to do related with tech.
Wow.
I know.
I expected it to be some sort of mental health angst related thing.
No, tech failures. Tech failures really got to me because I guess I get quite frustrated around them anyway. I don't feel like I have a very techie brain. And I don't really have fully the patience for it either. There are some good people who are very good at go on YouTube, figure it out. They'll read all the manuals, I'm not really that type of person. With the podcast, there were some very straightforward things to do, but then there would always be some sort of technical glitch, and because I was alone, I just didn't know how to figure it out or fix it. And I felt when those moments came, I think the reason why they were low is because they brought into really sharp focus that I was doing this alone. And really it wasn't about the tech failure, it was the frustration of that, of feeling when things aren't going well, who's going to help me and who's going to fix this? So
how did you drag yourself out of that?
I honestly I had to deal with it. I had to be like, well, this is the reality. This is what you chose. And yes, maybe you do need help and a partner along the way that may or may not come, but you don't just throw your toys out the pram and say, that's it, I'm not going to do it. You have to, this was that was my quicksand to trudge through or to run through, had to figure it out. Yeah. Had to push through this deeply uncomfortable situation that I was in.
Lonely situation.
Yeah, lonely situation, but also frustrated. I didn't like the idea that I didn't know what I was doing or that I didn't have a solution, a ready solution to a problem.
I suppose for me, from my perspective, it's important to know what you're not good at, and when you need to learn it and when you need to give it to someone else to do. But even if you try it, you then at least appreciate how hard it is.
100%.
And then you know what you're asking of others. because you've done it yourself to an extent, even if in a rookie way. So you appreciate, you know, Mark sitting behind the camera right now. I appreciate what Mark's doing because I have tried to do this before. So like I understand a little bit of how challenging this is. Had I not, I would have just thought it's a dude with a camera. Like how hard can it be?
And because I have also, you know, been behind the camera myself, so I understand it, and I have seen the difference, the way people who have done something themselves and not how they approach it. And someone who hasn't picked up a camera before, they really do think it's super easy, you know, and just point and shoot and that's that, you know. And then, but anyone who has always factors in all of these other variables that you wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah.
Time, this, that, the other. It's very interesting. And I agree with you. Learning what I was good at and what I needed to outsource and being honest with that was very important.
Yeah.
I'm not very good at marketing, for example, which in this day and age is it's a big drawback. You know, everyone is their own personal sort of brand and marketeer. And I'm good at crafting stories and putting them out into the world. But then I'm not very good at being like, people watch it, read it, see it. Yeah, I'm just not. It's not my forte.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure I could learn and be good, you know, but then I thought, yes, or you can hire the people whose job that is.
So we're going to talk about money in a second, because I think that's like an underexplored thing in entrepreneurship. But before we do, what's the best piece of advice that someone has given you through this journey of launching your own podcast, launching your own business? Do you even see it as a business yet?
Yeah, it's a good question. Best piece of advice I received, one I gave myself and one you actually gave me.
Oh.
Yeah. So the one I gave myself was stop being a perfectionist. The perfectionism will just halt everything in its tracks and you won't get anywhere. It's okay for it to be a work in progress. It's okay for it to be not great at the beginning, knowing that it will get better. That is part of the process. And thinking otherwise is just, it's wrong. It's actually a fallacy. And that was a really, really important thing I kept repeating to myself. And had I not kept repeating it to myself, I wouldn't have launched it, because I had this innate inner voice of like, it has to be perfect, it has to be ideal, it has to be this. And I'm so glad that somehow I managed to override that and keep saying, no, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just put it out. Just do it.
Look, it'll never be perfect. Nothing we create is ever perfect. But I think when an idea meets reality, you can get feedback, you can improve it. Because even perfection like implies that you have all the answers yourself, and you don't have the answers yourself. We need feedback. You know, I value so much when people give us feedback on our products, when they tell us what they like, what they don't like, because I don't have the answers myself. Kind of in too deep, actually, in a way. You can't always see things in a way that's impartial or accurate. So I would definitely echo that piece of advice.
But people often and I think this goes back again to those who've tried to do something themselves and those who haven't. I think those who have recognize that, because they recognize how many steps just everything takes. Those who haven't just see the final product, right? And then they just think, oh, well, that you shouldn't launch anything unless it's absolutely perfect. Or they're very quick to spot the flaws. Yeah. And yeah, you have to, I think, like I said, if you want to actually launch something, try and get over that mindset. Yeah. And appreciate that life is a work in progress and that we are all learning and growing along the way, and that's good, actually. It's not a bad thing. So that was the one I gave myself. And the one that you gave when we chatted one time, and I think I was quite frustrated with my progress, and I felt like things weren't happening quickly enough. And you actually, you said some really good, you gave me some really good words of advice. One was you have to approach this as a business. So that will answer the next question. You have to look at this like you're an entrepreneur now, and you have to have a long-term view. And I remember you drew this like line on a blank piece of paper, and you were like, this is where you are, but like this is your whole line of a year, and then you just put in markers of where you think in almost 3 month and 6 month chunks. And as opposed to what I had been doing was a bit too immediate. Like, I've recorded an episode, I put it out, I've edited it, I put it out, I've done the marketing, now I'm back to the next one. And I was just kept like eyeing up how many people are looking at, what's going, where, instead of having this more, looking a bit more at the horizon and recognizing that this will take time to build, and what are your shorter term goals, but having this longer one in mind. Yeah. That did help.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's very useful.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Voice in the post. Yeah.
Don't look at it, despair. So speaking about that, for many people, I think watching, they might think, okay, Layla, not everyone can afford to leave a job to take that risk. Yep. Can you talk to me about how you made that decision and maybe some of the practical challenges around, about deciding how you're going to manage your money to make it happen?
Yeah, well, one of the things I think I had been thinking, I think I knew that eventually I was going to want to go off on my own. So in the last few years, I started to really take a closer look at my finances and look at what I had saved, look at what I could put towards something of an investment that would maybe longer term sustain me or act as this buffer in the future.
Yeah, give me options.
Give me options so that I wasn't just thinking if everything ended today, I would have nothing. Yeah. But I wasn't also just keeping money in the bank that would be frittered away. So it was almost like this chunk is over here and it's safe.
Right.
So that was that was part of the financial planning or looking at. Then there was also money that was saved, which is, again, calculate, right, this can sustain me for 6 months to a year without earning, and I'll be okay.
Yeah.
And then it was, I suppose, I had reached a point in my career where I was earning quite well. So I was able to save. And I also reached a point in my career where I felt confident that if I ever needed to get back to work, I could.
Yeah. Okay.
I had reached a level where I knew that I could get a job, even if I was out of the business for a year. Okay. That I could get back into it. I don't know if that's true or not, given it's journalism, but in my mind, again, the things we tell ourselves to move forward, it's going to be fine. This is one of those things. But yeah, I did think about it, and there was plotting. There was definitely, I remember in the year before Third Culture therapy, and before leaving, I had spent a good year looking at my finances.
Taking a risk, telling yourself a good story, having confidence that you'll be okay, because that's what I'm hearing you say, that you had to, rightly or wrongly, hopefully we'll never find out, but you had to tell yourself a story that you will be fine. And you had to trust yourself. And maybe that's a really good note to end on. Can you tell me a little bit about what confidence has meant to you and what it has taken to get to the point where you trust yourself and you trust that even if I fail, however we define failure, but even if I fail, I'll be able to pick myself up and I will be okay. How did we get to that point?
I got to the point of believing in myself and having confidence after a lot of heartbreak in not feeling that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Tell me more. What do you mean?
I think my inability to fully believe in myself over the years stopped me from doing the things that I really wanted to and the courage to pursue them. And I towed a bit of a middle line because I was afraid. And though I don't like to talk too much about like regret because it's a dense sort of energy and a little bit useless, it is a regret of mine, It is that I didn't have that confidence when I was younger, when actually I had all the things in my favor. I had the skills, I had the energy, I had the opportunity, I just didn't fully believe in myself. And it makes me sad, actually, to think about that. It does make me sad to think that it was just a matter of confidence that stopped me, not practical. But, you know, some people have legitimately practical limitations to being able to achieve certain things. That, I'm very lucky to say, was not my case. It was my own limitation.
Wow.
And that is a sort of a little bit of a difficult thing to swallow, because you then see you can be your own worst enemy, and there's no one to blame then when you make that realization. There's no one else to say you didn't do this or you couldn't achieve that. It's on you. And so when I say I came to that realization after a lot of heartbreak, because when I struggled a little bit with my mental and emotional health a few years ago, that was part of my unraveling, was recognizing that. Was like, Layla, you stood in your own way. Yes, there were situations and people who also did, but actually, I was the one who either said, yes, go for it or not. And I could pinpoint the times in my life when I had that confidence and that courage, and I launched myself forward, and I was, you know, rewarded by the universe for it.
Yeah.
Through other opportunities. And then I can pinpoint the times in my life when I didn't, and it just brought me down and it made me feel sad.
What I'm hearing is a degree of accountability, and not to sound patronizing, but maturity that it takes to get to that point where you realize that you can be your own worst enemy. It's a mix of accountability, vulnerability, maturity, all of these things wrapped into something that's very powerful and very beautiful. And hopefully you won't look at the past regretfully, but you will look at that as being instrumental for you to get to the point where you could see that you had relative privilege, you had relative luck and talent, and that the only thing that could stop you was actually you. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very powerful. Then maybe, you know, what has been the thing you're most proudest of? Most proudest. The
answer, probably both in terms of my life and in third culture therapy, are the same. And I'm most proud of the beautiful connections I've made with people and the beautiful friendships that I have. When I think about, look, I am an ambitious person and I do want to do like well in life, whatever that means, you know, but the obvious ones, like, yes, I want my podcast to be like number one in all of the podcasts in all the world, you know, and I want to have big sponsors, and I want, you know, people, you know, I want to write my book and all of that. Of course, yes, I am still like a human with an ego. Yes, I'm managing it, but like that exists.
Just about,
exactly. But when I really, really bring it down, and especially in times when I am feeling a bit like, did I do well enough in my career? And could I have done better? And could I have been bigger? And could I, and then I think, but Layla, look around you. The people in your life are amazing. Like, I have amazing friends.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
I do. I have really amazing friends. I have a beautiful family, like my sisters, my niece and nephews, my mom. I have a great relationship with all of them. And I'm most proud of that, because that takes real time and effort and love and depth. And if nothing else, I'll be proud forever of that. I also believe that they reflect me, and because I think they're so amazing, I always think, well, that means I'm amazing. Because they wouldn't be with me.
A check on that ego. I'm very pleased.
That means I'm amazing too. Well, you know, we reflect each other, right? And so I think, yeah, that is what I'm most proud of. And that's also what I do in the podcast. I connect with people, and I'm proud of when a conversation ends, a recording ends, and my guest tells me, God, that was a really good conversation, Layla. Yeah. And I'm like, oh my God, yay! Even though that's exactly what it needs to be. But every time I hear that, I think, okay, good, I'm on the right track. Like, this was a good thing to do, because this person has had an amazing conversation with me.
Yeah. Well, I clearly lied earlier when I said that was going to be my last question, but I promise that this one is. What's the one piece of advice you'd give to anyone who's thinking of doing a career change, pivoting, maybe launching something new, whatever it might be? What would you say to them?
One only. Okay.
Preferably.
Yeah. If it is, because there are a lot of obvious pieces of advice, but I'll say a really important one is have yourself a good cheerleader. Whoever it is, sister, mother, brother, friend, partner, find and ask them to be your cheerleader, actually. Tell them, this is what I want to do. I'm going to have like crises. And then can you be the person who, you know, tells me to keep going and pats me on the back and gives me
lies to me occasionally.
And lies to me occasionally. Yeah, because you really need it. Honestly, that really got me through. Whenever I was like something, either my sister or a friend would be like, no, but keep going, it's great, you know, I love it. And then I would have that research, because it's going to be like this. It's going to be very like this. So it's good to have someone who can maintain a little bit of balance for you.
Great. Well, Layla, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and a bit of your career. And I can't wait to see what you've got in store for us with Third Culture Therapy.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Most welcome. Yeah, thank you.